5 main interview questions that you're likely to see in order of likelihood are product questions and behavioral questions, which are probably both as likely, technical interviews, case interviews, and strategy interviews. And then a few other type questions that you might see are estimation questions and metric type questions. And in the rest of the chapter, I'm going to touch on those 5 main ones that we're likely to see. And then in addition to those, a lot of companies also have their own interviews, particularly Facebook, which has their execution interview. But we go over that so in depth in the rest of the course that I'm leaving out here. And we're really just going to deep dive into those 5 main types. So there's absolutely no way I can memorize and be able to discuss all the criteria, and I really want to make sure I get it right. So I'm going to be using my laptop here, just make sure I give you the right information. And the information I talk about in this video, I'm going to include on a separate printout just so you have it for yourself. But really with product interviews, what they're looking for is your design capabilities and your ability to empathize with users. And an example question is basically going to be design a phone for a blind person. Was the first question I ever heard that Google uses, and I was just like, how do you answer that? And we're going to go in that in another video, but ultimately what these companies are going to rank you on and what they're looking for is can you provide design feedback and your responsibility for your design vision? And the criteria that they're going to rank you on are, do you define your goals and metrics? Did the candidate make reasonable selections and give support when they make decisions? Did the candidate choose a target persona? Did the candidate explain the persona's pain points? Was the candidate able to prioritize features and pain points? Did the candidate show creativity? Did the candidate explain how they would implement a feature? Did the candidate summarize? Basically, did the candidate summarize at the end and give a quick synopsis of everything they did? And was the candidate clear when moving through the steps? Ultimately, these are going to be the broader criteria that they're ranking on. And if you can kill each one of those, then you're going to do a great job on this interview. And it's really be able to go, success for this interview is really be able to go through a structured way and then come up with a creative solution that makes sense, that you justify your decisions throughout the process. So why this persona, why this pain point, why this solution, and that you can really justify all those. But ultimately, the main buckets that everything's going to fall in are goals, personas, pain points, prioritization, creativity, metrics, and justification. Those are the main areas that they're going to rank you on for this interview. So the next type of interview are behavioral interviews, and the criteria that companies are going to evaluate you on are going to vary from company to company. But overall, they're looking for, are you qualified to be a product manager based on your past experience? So the way you communicate your stories and the stories you choose to share are going to be incredibly, incredibly important. But behavioral interviews are basically going to be the questions such as, tell me about yourself, tell me a time when, those questions. They're really just trying to learn more about you. And they're going to be really evaluated on are you an owner and a leader? Have you made an impact? And are you a self-starter? And then when you communicate your stories, what they're really looking for is going to be, were you leading or were you just a participant? Was your achievement great and would have had it happened without you? And how are your communication skills? So the way you tell your stories and how you communicate them are really important. Are you concise? Do you ramble? Do you include details that aren't needed? These things really matter to behavioral interviews because product managers are great communicators. So you really need to have these skills when you're communicating them in your interview. So the next type of interview are technical interviews. And obviously I've talked about this before, but this is the interview I was really nervous about. There's 3 types of technical interviews that you can get. And those are the typical coding algorithm question, system design, and just discussing past technical projects that you've worked on. And ultimately, people with a computer science degree are probably going to be treated a bit differently in this interview. And your interview is going to be with an engineering manager. And when you think about this interview, don't stress too much because the interview is more of a pass-fail. It's not really like a behavioral or product interview where it's like bad, okay, good, great. It's just either you're going to have the technical skill set to pass the interview or you're not. And then again, I just want to discuss that they're really evaluating you. The main vet criteria they're looking on is, are you able to communicate with engineers? And that's how they're assessing you. So the next interview type is the next interview type is case interviews. And these are used by Indeed, Intuit, Lyft, Uber, and Asana. And typically what this is this is going to be a homework assignment. So they're going to email you the prompt ahead of time, and you're responsible for basically answering the prompt. So both Lyft and Uber use invent a product for Lyft or Uber or improve an existing product. So that's their prompt. And pretty much what you're going to have to do is fill out the case, and then you'll send it. And again, this is a typical pass-fail. You're either going to get the next interview or you're not. If you do pass, one of your next interview most likely will involve your case, and they're gonna grill you with questions about your case. Do you know it well? Are you right? What were you thinking? And that's what it's going to be about most likely. And again, so they're going to tell you to spend 4 to 6 hours on this. I'm going to tell you right now that I know multiple people who spent 40 plus hours on their case. So when they give this to you, don't think you can just bang it out in a few hours. Really take the time to craft a really good idea and think it through thoroughly. The case should mimic the typical structure of a product interview, because that's ultimately what they're testing you on. The goal of the case is to weed out candidates who don't really care, aren't going to put in the effort, and that they just don't think are going to meet the bar. So strategy interviews is the next one, and those ones are typically used by Google, or they're going to be in some way, shape, or form involved in your product interview. And ultimately, they're assessing the way so you can take a high-level problem and break it down into actionable components in a structured, thoughtful way. These could be trade-off questions, CEO-level questions, or marketing/market entry questions. Really, any kind of business strategy questions is what we're going for. So the last two question types are going to be metric and estimation. Usually these questions will never be their own interview. You'll never get just an estimation interview or just a metric interview. Usually they're going to be incorporated somehow in some way into the strategy or the product interview. With metric questions, it's typically going to just be, what are the metrics that you would use to measure this? How would you measure those metrics? Pretty much anything. And I've attached a sheet for metrics questions, and as long as you know those metrics really well, they're going to really help you. So as long as you understand how you can measure the metrics of your products and what the top ones are, you're going to be able to stand out, and that's how you're going to do well. Then the other one is estimation questions, and I actually included a chapter on these because these can be really hard to answer, like how many pieces of pizza are consumed in the US every day. Like if you don't know the structure and framework to answer that question, they're really hard to do. So I'm going to teach you the structure, and it'll be really simple. Google likes to include these questions a lot in their interviews, so it would be great to know for that. So those are all the interview questions you're going to take. Hopefully you didn't mind me using my laptop, because there was no way I was going to memorize those, and I didn't want to just kind of read off a teleprompter because that is just going to be really out of character. So I appreciate you being lenient on this video, but keep in mind that other companies have different interviews all the time. These are just the main ones and really what they're looking for each one. Obviously, Facebook has execution, Google strategy, Intuit has 2 people interview you. They're all different, but those are the main 5 ones, and then the 2 that type of questions that are usually incorporated in one of the main ones.